Because they know the only way lies can dominate truth is that lies must be constant. Constant. Anytime lies stop, truth surfaces. So in their approach of constant lies to propagandize our people, we must take the approach of constant truth to propagandize our people, but we must be constant. Every child in this country over 8 years old knows about Coca-Cola. Yet Coca-Cola doesn't stop putting up signs or whistling jingles. So we must be as enthusiastic about winning our people over the struggle as Coca-Cola is about selling Cokes.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Tony Delerme. Thanks for tuning into a brand new episode of You Must Learn. And on this show, we most definitely do the knowledge. DTK is the model. And on today's episode, we're going to keep going in and focusing on William Darity's great research paper called What We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. And we're specifically going to be focusing on myth number 6, titled Entrepreneurship Will Close the Racial Wealth Gap. But before we get into this chapter, like I've done in every episode so far, we have to go through the introduction of this great research paper because that's going to lay down the foundation for us to be able to properly understand the topic that we're going to get into today. So let's get into that right now. The racial wealth gap is large and shows no signs of closing. Recent data from the Survey of Income and Program Participation shows that black households hold less than 7 cents on the dollar compared to white households. The white household living near the poverty line typically has about $18,000 in wealth, while black households in similar economic straits typically have a median wealth near zero. This means in turn that many black families have a negative net worth. At the other end of America's economic spectrum, black households constitute less than 2% of those in the top 1% of the nation's wealth distribution. White households constitute more than 96% of the wealthiest Americans. Moreover, even among the nation's wealthiest households, extreme differences persist on the basis of race. The 99th percentile black family is worth a mere $1.5 million, while the 99th percentile white family is worth over $12 million. This means over 870,000 white families have a net worth above $12 million, while out of the 20 million black families in America, fewer than 380,000 are even worth a single $1 million. By comparison, over 13 million of the total 85 million white families are millionaires or better. Now, in previous episodes, you've heard me state the fact that 90% of the nation's wealth is calcified and held at the top by white society. But what I want to point out to you is the way in which that wealth stays calcified within white society. Let's get into it. In addition, Levine and Rubenstein have showed that the significant edge in entrepreneurship held by white males originates in their serendipitous birth into more affluent families. No better example is available than billionaire Mark Zuckerberg, owner of Facebook, who, while often touted as self-made, in fact, according to BusinessInsider.com, purportedly received initial working capital from his professional father in 2004 in exchange for shares in Facebook that are now worth millions. Another good example is billionaire Jeff Bezos, who started Amazon in 1994 with a $300,000 loan from his parents. In general, the net effect of entrepreneurship is to recycle and expanding, often an outrageously expanding circuit of wealth among members of an upper class of white players. In the 21st century, the number of persons coming from poverty, whether white or black, to enter the ranks of the super rich via entrepreneurship are infinitesimally small. Now, what this paragraph points out to you is the way in which wealth remains calcified within white society because wealth begets more wealth. Mark Zuckerberg did not create Facebook out of nothing. He was backed by his father in exchange for shares of Facebook that are now worth millions of dollars, and the same is true for Jeff Bezos with Amazon. I believe there is a video circulating the net right now, and it's been on YouTube for quite some time now, but basically it's a video of Jeff Bezos in a very dumpy office building, and he's basically being interviewed or showcased by a news network. And the point of the story is that the news network clowned him because they basically said, look at this guy in this dumpy office. He thinks he's going to do something and he's not. His whole Amazon thing is going to become a fiasco. Now, fast forward, obviously that wasn't the case. Amazon is like $1 trillion company now. But the optic of that old news video of Jeff Bezos sitting and operating out of a dumpy office building is very deceptive. Because you would think and believe Jeff Bezos got it out the mud, but he didn't. He was given a $300,000 stimulus package by his parents to get started with. How many of us in black society can be given a $300,000 stimulus package by any of our family members? It's not possible because we don't have that kind of wealth at all. But in white society, with the wealth being calcified at the top, this is the case for the majority of these startup companies that you see and hear about. A lot of you have no idea how expensive it is to live in the Bay, and particularly San Francisco and Silicon Valley and that whole area up there in Northern California. A studio apartment costs damn near $5,000 to $6,000. There's no rooms, just 4 walls. That's it. Startup companies, these young kids are not going up there getting it out the mud with their startup companies. They're being funded and backed by their parents. But when you get the story of them afterwards, when they blow up and their company is now $1 billion, trillion company, they'll paint the picture to you as if these kids and these people just worked hard and got it out the mud, when in fact they're being backed by their family who has wealth in order to invest into them. Now, what I want to do right now is really get into the meat and potatoes of black businesses. We are heavy on the buy back the block movement right now and entrepreneurship and starting black businesses, but it's important for us to understand the reality of black businesses and where they stand today in America. So let's get into that next. In reality, the data paints a daunting picture for diversity and entrepreneurship. According to the U.S. Census Bureau survey of business owners, which is conducted every 5 years, over 90% of black firms do not have even one employee other than the owners. The portion of owner-only firms reach as high as 98% for the subgroup of black female-led businesses. When blacks do own a business, the return to the business is lower than that of whites and falls well short of closing the racial wealth gap. Businesses with paid employees have a much greater economic impact than those without employees. The annual sales of businesses without employees are on average only a fraction of the sales of businesses with employees. While there are some firms without employees that are very successful financially, the majority are not. 67.3% of firms without employees had an annual sales of less than $25,000. Any profits these firms made, if they did make profits, would only be a fraction of the total sales. This means that many firms without employees do not make enough to keep their owners and the owners' families out of poverty if the firm is their owner's sole source of income. On the other hand, a majority, 57.9% of businesses with paid employees had annual sales of more than $249,000. It is more likely that these firms are earning profits for their owners. Now let's really digest this for a second. I'm going to read this again. And once again, I'm going to cite this source. This is coming from the U.S. Census Bureau survey of business owners. Only 90%, or I shouldn't say only, I'm sorry, 90% of black businesses have no employees outside of the owner. Understand this. If you don't have employees, but you have a business, there is no way on God's green earth you can make a dent in the racial wealth gap. You're not doing anything. By having a business, and I don't mean to put down anybody that has their own business, because if you have your own business, regardless of if you have employees or not, and that you're maintaining your family with that, that is commendable. It's to be applauded, and I salute you. So I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but the reality is this: if you have your own business but you don't have any employees, it's essentially no different than just having a job. The only difference is that you don't have a boss, but you still just got a job. You're just surviving like everybody else still. Doesn't mean you're not living well, but it's no different from having a gig. You really have a business, if we're being serious about business ownership, when you have employees. Because now you're not just making money, you're putting money in the pockets of other people. That's a real business. And when it comes to black business ownership, when it comes to black businesses, 90% of black businesses do not have one employee. Not one. And according to the data that I read off to you, these businesses aren't even making money like that. They're barely staying afloat. Once again, it's not to disrespect anybody that has their own business. I would never do that. I'm trying to do the same thing myself. But we have to understand that the reason these black businesses are not growing and expanding to the point to where they can now have employees and hire their own people is because there is simply not enough wealth in the black community to sustain these businesses to do so. Here in Los Angeles, the median net worth for white families is $330,000. with $110,000 in liquid assets. $110,000 liquid, meaning they got $110,000 on deck in the bank account right now that they can pull out and use for whatever they want. But also in Los Angeles, the median net worth for black families is $4,000 with $200 in liquid assets, meaning that we only have $200 that we can go grab and put our hands on right now. $330,000 in net worth versus $4,000 in net worth. $110,000 liquid versus $200 liquid. You can't compete. You can't compete. These are the facts. And the thing is that when you're talking this talk, a lot of you brothers and sisters get emotional and you get mad. And you think I'm telling you, don't start black businesses because it's not worth it. That's not what I'm telling you. But I'm trying to get you to understand why your business isn't growing and why we're not going to be able to close the racial wealth gap without reparations. Black businesses will not cut it alone. Buying back the block will not cut it. You can't buy back the block when the people in the community cannot afford to sustain the businesses. It's not an issue of creating businesses in the hood. It's not an issue of creating businesses in black neighborhoods. It's an issue of being able to sustain those businesses. The wealth isn't there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. These are the facts that a lot of people just don't want to accept. And if you're not going to accept this as for the fact that it is, then as a people, we are going to forever be under the thumb of white society. Things like gentrification will never stop, where at moment's notice, white people can just come into your neighborhood and throw you out. Because all of a sudden, they've decided that, you know what, I've never noticed this part of town before, but now that I'm here, I like it and I'm going to take it. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's just one example of many. Now, what I want to do next is get into who actually owns all the businesses in America. Now, we all know that it's white folks, but I just want to get into these facts and figures because it's important that you know the actual numbers. Let's get into it. Data from the Small Business Administration indicates that just over 19 million businesses, or 70.9% of all U.S. businesses, are white-owned. Blacks own about 2.6 million businesses, or 9.5% of all U.S. businesses. But the sales and the employment numbers tell a more depressing story. The 19 million white-owned businesses have 88% of the overall sales. and control 86.5% of U.S. employment, while black businesses have a mere 1.3% of total American sales and 1.7% of the nation's employees. Now, what this paragraph highlights is the fact that without reparations, you cannot close the racial wealth gap. It's not happening. It's not possible. You can't do it when white America owns 70.9% of all U.S. businesses, encompassing for 86.5% of all U.S. employment. You will forever be under the thumb, complaining about racism on the job, but who cares? Yeah, black people are always complaining, and you can just get shooed to the side because you don't have no power anyways. What are you gonna do? You can't do nothing about it. That's why when you at work, you always gotta tiptoe around certain things and you gotta play nice, but nobody ever has to play nice with you. And another thing too that I want to get into, because when you look at these numbers, the fact that whites own 70.9% of all businesses, don't let people run the percentage game on you. And what I mean by the percentage game is this. You'll see a figure like this. White people own 70.9% of all businesses and control 86.5% of U.S. employment. And when you read something like that, what people will often do is that they'll say, well, white people are the majority of the population, so of course those are the numbers. You're only, 13-14%, so what are you even talking about? That's game. That's game. And I'll prove to you how that's game. In South Africa, 80% of the country of South Africa consists of native South Africans, actual South Africans, meaning black. They are 80% of the population. The white occupying class in South Africa, because that's who they are, they're not native to the country. The white occupying class of South Africa consists of, if I remember correctly, 8.9% of the population. Yet despite that, 90% of South Africa's impoverished class consists of native South Africans. The native South Africans consist of 80% of the total population, yet make up 90% of the impoverished class. So if it was simply a percentage thing, and we gotta remember, apartheid is gone now in South Africa, everything's even Steven now. So how is it possible that 80% of the population in South Africa can hold 90% of the nation's poverty? Because it was systematically built that way. And once white society locked into wealth by way of apartheid, unless they're going to make it a point to redistribute the wealth and give those folks reparations to make amends for the past, that 80% will forever be locked out of their own economy in their own native country. So don't let anybody run the percentage game on you. That's game. Just because there's more white people in America than black people doesn't mean that it makes logical sense that they own overwhelmingly all the businesses. Because all you got to do is point to South Africa to see that that's not the case. And with all that being said, I ain't got no more talking, so make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell notification next to the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever I drop a new video. And like I always say, most importantly to me, make sure you text TD Hip Hop to number 33222. That's TD Hip Hop to number 33222. That way you can get a direct text notification whenever I drop a new video. And that also serves as an insurance plan to me, so that way in case YouTube ever tries to get me up out of the mix, you'll have direct access to me, or I should say I'll have direct access to you so that I can hit you guys with the new links to where you can find me at next. And also, and lastly, if you want to help out on the financial side, you can find me on Cash App. That's $TD Hip Hop. And you can help me and support me with the advertising fund. I can always use and always need help with that. And if you don't have Cash App on your phone, I'll make sure to leave the link in the description for you below. That way you can hit that link and you could donate whatever amount you'd like to the advertising fund. And you simply pay for that the same way you pay for anything else online. So with all that being said, I'm your boy Tony Delerme. I'm out of here, man. Deuces.